Steamboat School by Deborah Hopkinson, illustrated by Ron Husband, inspired by a true story. I always thought being brave was for grown-up heroes doing big, daring deeds, but Mama says that sometimes courage is just an ordinary boy like me doing a small thing, as small as picking up a pencil. The Candle School. I might as well begin with that first morning when Mama made such a fuss over my going to school. Ouch! My face isn't a washboard, I cried. She kept scrubbing. James, this is a proud day, she said. Truth was, Tassie had to drag me all the way. I wanted to stop and see everything. The steamboats dotting the river, their black smokestacks straight as pencils, the levee bustling with men loading and unloading sugarcane, cotton, wheat, and logs for the sawmills. River bells clanged. People shouted and scurried like ants. Hurry, urged Tassie. Reverend John doesn't hold with being late. At 3rd and Almond, we slipped into the church and headed down the basement steps into the darkness to the tallow candle school. Why can't we have windows? I whined, already missing the sun. Hush! You know why, Tassie said. And I did. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Welcome to school, James, said Reverend John. We make our own light here. Our teacher. I followed Tassie regular after that, though I couldn't get used to the darkness. But I liked when Reverend John read to us or told us his own story, how he was born a slave and worked in the Kentucky saltpeter caves to buy his own freedom. Then earned enough to free his mother and father, too. But before he could buy liberty for his wife, her master brought her here to St. Louis. Reverend John followed, walking hundreds of miles. I arrived for $3, he told us, but you have to pay $2 to cross the Mississippi, we chimed in. He laughed and held out his hands. All I needed was that $1 in my 2 hands to start again. Reverend John went to work as a barrel maker and carpenter. He earned enough to free his wife. Then he became the first leader of his church. He believed in hard work and learning. He believed in us, too. When the men came. And then one day, men came. They shouted. Footsteps pounded. The door flew open. Reverend John stood up to meet them. This school is closed, the sheriff said. The state of Missouri has a new law. No reading and writing for you folks, slave or free. The new law, 1847. Later, I asked Reverend John to write out the law on a scrap of paper. Be it enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Missouri as follows. No person shall keep any school for the instruction of Negroes or mulattoes reading or writing in this state. Finding a way. That night, Tassie's tears glistened on her cheeks, as shiny as her needle in the lamplight. What will happen now? She asked. I thought of all those days Tassie had dragged me to school. Now I felt as if a penny I'd counted on had fallen out of my pocket. Reverend John Barry Meacham cares more for education than any man in this city, Mama said. He's a force, like the Mississippi River itself, and like the river, he'll find a way. I didn't see how, though. I took out my scrap of paper and read the law again. We waited, but no word came. At night, I made letters and numbers by candlelight. By day, I toted bundles of laundry for Mama and practiced reading signs. Dry goods, horses to let, stable, barber, potatoes. I closed my eyes. Horses. Horses. One morning, my steps took me to the church. I thought of our books and slates in that dark room. Funny how something you don't care much about at first can end up becoming the most important part of you. The door opened, and Reverend John stepped out. Hello, James. If you're done helping your mother today, come along with me. She led the way to the levee, to the bright new steamboat. She's a real beauty, I said. Did you buy her, sir? For answer, he held up his 2 hands. I could use some help now, though, he said. Tassie and I helped every day after that, painting, hammering, and polishing the deck. What's inside? I asked one day. Hush, said Tassie. Don't you know? And I did. Meet at dawn. At last the little riverboat was done. Reverend John said it was time. I felt like a pot about to bubble over. Tassie and I carried Mama's bundles of laundry like always, but this time we poked our heads into small houses and spoke softly to friends we met on the road. In 3 days' time, meet at dawn, meet where the river bends. Be careful. Dipping the oar. The streets were dark when Tassie and I set out. We walked quickly by the levee. Suddenly, I turned a corner and bumped into a policeman. "Where are you two going?" he growled. "We're freedmen, sir. Our mother's a laundress," I squeaked out. Tassie nodded. "We're fetching 2 big bundles of laundry for her." He grunted and waved us on. We ran the rest of the way. In the gray fog, the river smelled like mud. I pointed. "There! He's over there!" We climbed into the skiff, our teacher dipping his oar into the still, deep water. "I don't see anything," someone whispered. Then a breeze lifted the fog a little, and we saw a boat anchored in the river. "That's it," I breathed. "That's our school." Freedom School. New chairs and desks. A small library with books. "I'm bringing my pole tomorrow," Tom cried. "We can catch fish for lunch." "Welcome to Freedom School," Reverend John told us when we'd settled in our benches. "But, sir, what about the law?" Mary asked. "James knows about the law," said Reverend John. "Can you tell them?" I stood as tall as I could. "The law says we can't be taught in the state of Missouri, but we're in the middle of the Mississippi River now. The river doesn't belong to just one state. It belongs to the whole country. The law against learning can't reach us here." Reverend John smiled. Then he laughed out loud, and we laughed too. "Now let's get to work, children," he said. "The sun's up." And it was. Being brave. I've written it out like Mama asked, but I don't think I'll ever forget, for I've made up my mind to go to school till I'm old enough to row other children out and teach the little ones to read. I won't forget, because now I know that being brave can sometimes be a small thing, like lighting a candle, opening a book, or dipping an oar into still, deep water. Author's note. Steamboat School is a fictional story inspired by the life of Reverend John Barry Meacham. Meacham was a minister, entrepreneur, and educator in St. Louis, Missouri, who fought tirelessly for the rights of African Americans. Born into slavery in 1789 in Virginia, he was brought by his masters to North Carolina and Kentucky, where, by 1815, he managed to purchase his own freedom by working in saltpeter mines. He later wrote, "Still I was not satisfied, for I had left my old father in Virginia, and he was a slave. It seemed to me at times, though I was 700 miles from him, that I held conversations with him, for he was near my heart. In a short time, I went to Virginia and bought my father. My father and myself then earned enough to pay our expenses on the way, and putting our knapsacks on our backs, walked 700 miles to Hardin County, Kentucky. Here the old man met his wife and children, who had been there several years. Oh, there was joy. Meacham's own wife was still enslaved, so he followed her to St. Louis when her master brought her there. He worked as a carpenter and cooper and earned money to buy freedom for his wife and children. He also purchased slaves himself. A firm believer in hard work, he then freed them and hired them to work for him until they'd paid him back. Meacham, whose father was a Baptist preacher, began working with John Mason Peck, a white missionary whose St. Louis congregation included both whites and blacks. Peck also ran a day school for slave children. Meacham was ordained in 1825 and became the leader of a newly formed separate African American congregation, established as the first African Baptist Church of St. Louis. The community built a new church at 3rd and Almond Streets in 1827. Reverend Meacham was passionate about the importance of education, and he continued to run a school in the church's basement. Among the students who attended was James Milton Turner, who later became a consul to Liberia and a prominent St. Louis educator. The boy in the story is named James in Turner's honor, but I could not find any evidence that Turner attended Meacham's new Steamboat School, sometimes called the Floating Freedom School. Meacham's Steamboat School came about in 1847 when a new law against educating blacks forced Meacham to close his tallow candle school. Meacham found an ingenious solution to the new state law. He moved his school to a steamboat in the Mississippi River, which was considered federal property. Although I have done extensive research and visited the St. Louis Historical Society in St. Louis, I've been unable to find any oral histories or memoirs from anyone who actually attended the school. Meacham died in 1854. In 1855, his widow Mary was arrested after 5 runaway slaves who had left from her home were caught crossing the Mississippi River into Illinois. Her home was declared a depot on the Underground Railroad. In 2001, the Mary Meacham Freedom Crossing became the first site in Missouri to be recognized as part of the National Park Service National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom.